Hello, my name is Kai, and today we're going to be talking about how Liverpool could play like PSG. Now, this doesn't mean that Liverpool are going to directly imitate everything that PSG does. Instead, what I think that this means is that we're going to try to emulate PSG. We're going to try to make our own system based on a lot of their similar principles. But before I get into it, it'd be great if you guys could like the video, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on Twitter. But anyway, let's get right into it. So there are a lot of different ideas that I'm going to attempt to cover in this video, but we're going to start by just looking at a lot of different things that happen on the pitch, and then afterwards I'll actually go to the tactics board and kind of explain what we just saw, and then we'll apply it to Liverpool. So in this first panel, we're seeing build up starting from Donnarumma, the goalkeeper, who's looking to pass it out to one of the center backs. So for example, he could go this way or this way, he could go to Nuno Mendes, or he could go to his pivot player. This is in a game against Lille. I'm trying to not use obvious examples of PSG like the final against Inter. I'm mostly just going to look at this game versus Lille and another game versus Real Madrid, because I think that they kind of show the principles that I want to talk about. Donnarumma ends up passing it to Marquinhos. Now Marquinhos once again has a bunch of options. He can pass it to Hakimi, he pass it to this pivot player, he can pass it to the center back. He has a lot of different options. He could even go all the way to Nuno Mendes. But what PSG like to do against weaker opposition is sort of probe around until they can find an opening. So if we go to the next panel, you can see that it goes to the other center back, and we kind of have this back three that's forming with sort of 5 developing here and 2 here. It's very similar to Arne Slot's 3-2-5 with a couple of differences, because in this case this is one of the fullbacks, but the principle is very similar in terms of build up. Go to the next panel and it ends up with Nuno Mendes, who has the option to pass it forward or pass it back. Of course, this time he chooses to pass it back again. They're looking for good openings. But it's interesting to see the types of players that are pushing up. Again, there's a difference between starting in a 4-3-3 like PSG do versus starting in a 4-2-3-1 like we do. It's very different in terms of like the players that can move around. So for PSG, their midfield tends to go very wide or close and just kind of rotates around. We're probably less likely to see that with us, but there would be some kinds of rotations that we would see, just not in the exact same way as PSG. But we're still just analyzing PSG. Ends up finally passing it out to Bradley Barcola. Barcola ends up immediately passing it on to João Neves, and you have an on-rushing attacker. In this case, this is Gonçalo Ramos, which is, again, a striker. So PSG doesn't need to have a bunch of wingers who are effectively doing everything, who are just rotating. Ball ends up getting back to Bradley Barcola, because PSG kind of like these 1-2 combinations to get inside with the potential of crossing or driving to the byline and cutting back, or having the freedom to cut inside, go into the center and take a shot or lob across to the back post. It has a lot of different versatility when they're counterattacking, especially because of the fluid movements. It's hard for a defender to know who they need to pick up. We end up getting to the situation where Bradley Barcola is sizing up his fullback and instead just decides to slip the ball in for an on-rushing João Neves. Neves gets the ball and he has a bunch of different options. He could cross here, he could try something where he tries to cut it back here, or he could just kind of dribble out and escape. In this case, he cuts it back to somebody like Bradley Barcola, who then has the opportunity to shoot. Now there are a lot of different options that could happen, but what you could tell is that it was very fluid, this PSG attack. One of the midfielders flew forward, a midfielder's at the edge of the box. They have their winger in Ousmane Dembele all the way on the right-hand side. There's a lot of different combinations that can happen here. So let's look at another panel. This time I'm looking at PSG out of possession. So the ball got knocked long and Mendes headed it away. And you can see that all of these players are attempting to converge on where they think the ball is going to be. They do end up converging on where the ball is going to be. In this case, the ball gets passed in behind and goes out of play. But what you can tell from this PSG press is that they really try to clamp onto players. It's, again, very similar to what Giovanni van Bronckhorst does versus what we did last season. Because last season we had this very passive 4-2-4 press where you would have 4 players in your attack pressing really aggressively when they try to build up. And then once they're in the midfield, one player would kind of just give chase. In this situation, you have multiple players trying to converge constantly. It's a much more aggressive press, and I think that's also what we're trying to go for. Now, the reason I chose this panel is because it does a pretty good demonstration of showing a connected back three where you have both of the center backs and the left back. I think we're going to go for this now. Assuming that we get someone like Rodrigo, it would make a lot of sense. Now, as for them being 6 here, this is a 3-1-6 in this case, which is something that we could try to do. I just think it's more likely, because of how our team's going to play, for it to be a 3-2-5, because you don't want Ryan Gravenberch to be the sole member of the pivot because he's not an elite passer, right? So ideally he would need to be next to someone like McAllister, who would then be able to do the passing part of this, the deep progression. Because in PSG's case, because it's a midfield three, you can have a midfielder push up here, there's a midfielder out wide. Because in this game, PSG used Desiree Doué in midfield, so he's naturally going to push up, and then Joao Neves kind of just drifts wide sometimes into these roles. So you wouldn't really see the exact same thing. But you could imagine a Liverpool team where this is Jeremy Frimpong, or this is Frimpong, and one of these is Salah. This is your striker, this is Florian Wirtz, and this is Rodrigo. You can imagine a team that looks like this. And then you could have a scenario where this is Ryan and McAllister chose to push up. So you could imagine this being our build-up shape. And you can kind of see us doing this. There were semblances of this in the Preston game where like this role was occupied by Rio. So let's look at the Madrid game. I really like this game for showing the fluidity of PSG in their build-up and in the final third. Because you could see a lot of the mimicry in some of the roles that we could potentially have. Like for example, in this game, look at how high Achraf Hakimi is. And in these next few panels, he sort of just runs in behind. Something that we saw Connor Bradley doing constantly, even from these more central positions. I could imagine this being something that Arne Slot plans to do and potentially stole or is tweaking. The reason I chose this sequence is because it kind of shows how fluid PSG's front three is. So in this situation, we start with Dembele and Doué swapping positions because Dembele started as the striker and Doué was on the right wing. We progress forward. Dembele attempts to swap to this position. Hakimi pushes up. You have Nuno Mendes, who's fully inverted as well and is high up the pitch. You have their midfield sort of grafting in behind, and Kvaratskhelia is out wide. Kvaratskhelia gets the ball and then passes it back. We now once again have our midfield that's somewhat connected. Desiree Doué has drifted even further out to the left. Dembele is sort of in his central striker position now, but the width is being fully occupied by Hakimi, who then makes the run in behind as Vitinha attempts to pass. He fails, but the ball gets recycled again. This time, Dembele is strongly on the right wing, and Kvaratskhelia is very far wide, and your left back and your right back are in the box. You could imagine Milos Kerkez and Connor Bradley in these very narrow half space facing positions and ending up there after pushing up. Again, the ball just kind of gets recycled again. And in this final panel, you can see something that we're probably going to see a lot next season. An on-rushing fullback like Frimpong and Bradley. Mo here, passing in behind. You could see a striker dropping in or making this run. If it's Ekitike, he's capable of both. You have a very narrow fullback and you have your wide winger. The difference in our situations is probably going to be that it's less likely that we would see our fullback in these positions, and it's probably going to be our 10 instead. But it is still something that could just develop and occur with the shape that we're going for. And if we didn't sign Rodrigo, it would probably effectively look like this all the time. Maybe with Kerkez overlapping more, but again, these two would interchange, these two would interchange, and your striker would be here. In this panel, we just see a scenario where Doué's in the position he's supposed to be, Kvaratskhelia is here, and you have your left back and your striker occupying similar positions, and this time Hakimi is further back, and this play develops a little bit with Hakimi coming forward and your striker fully just leaving the box. Just shows how fluid PSG are capable of being. So this is one of the goals that PSG scored. And I really like this build-up because I could imagine someone like Frimpong doing this. Or even someone like Kerkez doing this if he's in the Barisic role. Because what happens is Hakimi passes the ball out to midfield, makes a run, receives the ball immediately because there's a massive amount of space to run into. So Hakimi goes in, receives the ball. The ball then gets passed back to Dembele, and Hakimi goes in to receive it again because there's a massive open space here. And you can see that you have two on-rushing attackers, and Fabian Ruiz, who's one of the midfielders, and Kvaratskhelia. Hakimi ends up laying off the ball into space, and Ruiz flubs it a little bit, but he ends up scoring a goal, as you can see there. What this shows is that we have a lot of counter-attacking potential because of how fast our fullbacks are. That our fullbacks can sort of just carry the ball, make space, and then cross it onto on-rushing wingers or midfielders. It's another tactic we can use because we have these threat-in-behind fullbacks who are going to have a lot of the width of the team, especially on the right-hand side, because we do expect Frimpong to stretch, maybe even more more than Kirkes, right? Because Kirkes has more build-up responsibility. Again, this Madrid game is great for showing the fluidity of PSG's attack, because in this situation, Kvaratskhelia is central, and he stays central with Dembele on the right. Ball ends up getting out wide. It gets crossed to Dembele, who attempts to cut it back to Kvaratskhelia, and ultimately this play fizzles out. But the fluid rotations of PSG make it really hard to pick up a certain player. And if we saw games like the Chelsea game, people are like, why do you want to play like PSG if they just lost to Chelsea? Well, the Chelsea game was just great tactical awareness. Maresca overloaded Nuno Mendes and was able to capitalize on it. Those are the types of mistakes that Luis Enrique isn't going to make again. It's because of how new this system is and these ideas are that you're ultimately going to see some people exploit it, and you'll see a lot of mistakes, but ultimately the way that PSG play is very, very optimal. It's a very, very good way of playing. The problem is that you need very intelligent footballers to execute it. So although it's a great way of playing football, you need the right profiles in order to play that way. So let's discuss this team, and let's talk about the different positional combinations that they have, the different build-up strategies. So initially what you see a lot from PSG is something like this. Hakimi will move up, you'll get this back three that forms, the left back moving over. You'll get a lot of situations like this. Sometimes you'll even get things like this, or if João Neves is on this side, you'll get something like this, where one of the midfielders in the midfield three moves out wide to occupy this space so that the winger can come inside, and then Hakimi stretches on this side so this winger can come in. And then you sort of get this hybrid double pivot where you can pass it to Vitinha, he's secure in possession as a 6, he's a true deep-lying playmaker, and he can pass it to Kvara or Dembele, depending on who's marking who. Or he can usually go out wide to João Neves. It gives you a lot of options in build up, because for example, Nuno Mendes could pass it to Neves, make an inverted run, get the ball back, pass it to Dembele, overlap here. It's difficult to pick up both, and Dembele finds somebody. These are the sorts of combinations that happen. We also see situations where instead of the left back dropping in, it's someone like Vitinha who drops in, and the left back takes up these positions. We see this as well. This is another build-up strategy that we could use. It'd be difficult to use with someone like Ryan, but it is a build-up tactic that we could use. But it maintains the same shape. PSG tend to maintain the same shape of the 3-2-5/3-1-6. That's one of the main reasons you kind of get the PSG comparisons, because with how we were playing, it's not just the fluid rotations, it's the build-up shape. Because we're not going to copy PSG in terms of having wingers everywhere who are swapping constantly and like a robust midfield three. No, we're copying them in terms of build-up shape and fluid rotations. That's effectively how we're copying them. Because I've heard some people say, why don't you say that we're just playing like Klopp did? Because Klopp had a false 9. Because we're not playing in the same way. Klopp would just have flying fullbacks, goal-scoring attackers, and a facilitating 9 with a grafting midfield. That's effectively how we played with Klopp. That's not how we're playing here. Our midfield isn't just going to graft and press. Our midfield is going to interchange with some members of the attack. Our midfield is going to focus more on possession than having to press constantly and play make through counter-pressing. Our midfield is actually going to just do build-up. Both of our fullbacks aren't going to constantly fly forward. One of them's going to help with build-up. It's not exactly the same system that Klopp would have. We don't even need to actually have a false 9, which is something I'll talk about when we actually look at Liverpool's potential squad. It's just the case with PSG. But in PSG's attack, because of how these players are, this could end up happening, and they're not forced to swap back. You could just have a situation for 3 or 4 minutes where Kvaratskhelia is the striker, and he drops in to pick up the ball and sprays it to Doué. Could find Hakimi on the underlap or the overlap, and then he crosses it inside. It's completely possible with this sort of team. And these sorts of fluid rotations make it difficult in the final third. So like if I get into this situation, maybe Doué's wide and Hakimi made the inverted run. You have Mendes on the outside, Vitinha a little deeper, just set up some shape like this. Players end up defending closer to the ball because they need to pick up these runners. It's very difficult to pick up 5 players like this. It usually just ends up leaving the back 3 that you create, or back 2, just free to sort of pass around. But yeah, you could get situations where you pass it to Kvaratskhelia, he drops out a little bit, passes it to Neves, Neves drives, gives it back, and you sort of progressively get these rotations. Dembele moves in, maybe runs across, attempts to cut it back to a midfielder. Very fluid, because what you're depending on with these systems is that all of these players are aware of where they need to be, like aware of where the space is spaces, and then when space is vacated, someone takes it up. It's kind of similar to what Guardiola does, where no players can be in the same vertical or horizontal line. That's why he designed those pitches that way that he has in his training. But this is much more of a free way of doing that and less of a like robotic structure where, oh, I can't directly be in line with this person. I need to shift here or shift here. It's more so total football-esque. That's effectively how PSG are playing. It's much more just you go where there's space vacated, move to that position. If someone else wants to drive into that position with the ball, go to where they are, and the midfield just rotate together, the attack rotate together alongside the fullbacks, and the defenders just defend. Like the two center backs are just the two center backs, right? Like Vitinha's in more of a reserved role. These two are in more of a reserved role. One of the fullbacks is in a reserved role, and everyone else just sort of interchanges. I think Slot's going for something like that. The interchanging, the combinations, the pressing. That's what we want to emulate from PSG. So now let's actually talk about Liverpool and what this means. So I think people have already heard my thoughts from the Preston game at this point, but I think we're going to see something like this. It's one of the reasons we might have brought in someone like Bronkhorst. It looks a lot like his Rangers team in terms of build-up, but you could get situations like this. Now, if we do end up signing somebody like Rodrigo, let's pull Dom out for a moment and let's bring in Rodrigo. I think we end up with something like this. Now, if you sign Ekitike, because I'm not going to say Isak for now, because most of the links as of recently have been Ekitike now, you could get a situation like this. Now, Ekitike isn't just a channel runner. There's a benefit to him being a channel runner, but he can also drop in and facilitate, similar to how Ousmane Dembele can. Similarly, because Ekitike is going to run into different spaces, like if Ekitike chooses to run out here, Florian Wirtz can fill the space, Mo Salah can fill into the space, Rodrigo can move inside. Maybe one of your midfielders goes out wide. Maybe Kirkez picks up these positions when Ekitike goes wide. Playing like PSG doesn't mean that you need to have wingers who are just rotating all the time. It means that your players don't strictly need to stay in their position. Rodrigo could end up on the right with Salah on the left. That's completely fine. You can have build-up shapes where Ekitike starts with the ball, gives it to McAllister and cuts through. And then in order to vacate the space, maybe Florian Wirtz goes into more of a defensive position. And you get into a final third where something like this is happening. With Florian Wirtz out here, McAllister here, maybe Ryan takes up more of a defensive position. Something like this even. And this isn't like someone like Wirtz playing in the pivot. It's just something that would end up happening. And then maybe he whips the ball inside and it gets to Salah and then he box crashes and then Rodrigo fills the space. Kirkez goes wide, right? You cut the ball back to Ekitike. He gives it to someone like McAllister, right? McAllister maybe finds a ball to someone like Rodrigo. Ekitike ends up further back in these positions. The idea is just pass and move football. Now, I could actually look at PSG statistics and talk about how they attack, what numbers they have, but that's sort of irrelevant because we're not playing exactly like them. We're not playing in the French league where it's much easier. It'd be difficult for me to look at those statistics and tell you that we're going to be that potent offensively, that we're going to concede as few goals, that we're only going to lose 2 games in the league. That's not realistic. But what I can show you is how they do play, and I can tell you how different this is from last season, because if we talk about last season, I'm going to keep the players the same, but I'll talk about how we played. Robertson is in a reserved role. Trent was in a reserved role where they're just narrow, right? Salah's high up here. Striker's a little deeper. Your 10's a little deeper, right? Your winger's out wide here, sometimes inside. In this system, it wasn't very fluid, right? Your striker could run into a space and Salah comes inside, but there wasn't a lot of fluid movement, right? It's just a runner from deep. Maybe Trent overlapped. Maybe Robertson overlapped. It wasn't very fluid last season. It was very structured build-up, because Arne Slot focused on defensive principles last season. He focused on getting the team to play well, getting the team to play in his formation, maximizing a lot of Mo. With how we're going to play next season, especially if we're trying to emulate PSG with these fluid rotations, it's not going to be very structured and rigid. The only 2 players who are going to have truly restricted freedom will be the 2 center backs. Like, before I've been talking about how you can't really maximize the players in the pivot like McAllister because he's going to be deep, but if we're playing like PSG, there's situations where McAllister can run in and Ekitike drops or Wirtz drops or Rodrigo drops. Everyone has to be selfless. People like Rodrigo will be told to run in behind instead of be ball to feet, even if it's not their intention, like their normal modality, what they want to do. They'll be forced to do it for the system, because when you move towards something like this, the individual element's gone. Everyone needs to press. Mo needs to press. Mo needs to track back. Some people will say that's less optimal, but if you have good footballers around him, right? Like if you think of Ekitike as a Burkamp-esque facilitator instead of as a Isak regen, or like a baby Isak, you could think of it as Mo starts out wide and he gets it to Frimpong and cuts inside, and Ekitike goes in for the ball, passes it here, goes out wide, and lets Mo come inside because Mo is going to be in that conductor role, right? You can see it more like Mo doesn't have to be the focal point, but he's still going to score a lot of goals. He could even score more because there's so many fluid movements that space is going to open up. It's not going to be Mo going after a center back and a fullback. It's Mo potentially going in between two center backs who have been split apart and having the freedom to shoot because of the space that's going to get vacated, the space that's going to exist now. Now, there are obvious problems with the system. If you don't have intelligent enough footballers, they're going to mess up some combination with too many players forward, and there's going to be a terrible counterattack. Maybe a team's going to attempt to overload one side with the intention of isolating someone on the other wing, and then one of your fullbacks gets cooked by a 2-on-1. That could happen. But if you think about it, that's not very different from what we had under Klopp and Linders. We had those counterattack problems. But the difference is we have a coach that's better at making defensive structures, because Klopp wasn't an elite manager in making a defensive structure. The reason we were good defensively is because we pressed well. We had a great press. Slot is pretty good at actually coaching defenders to be better positionally, so we're going to deal with a lot of counterattacks that way. But also, because of the types of footballers we're going for, Rodrigo, doesn't matter if you think he's not fast enough, which he is, or you don't think he's going to score enough, which he does, or create enough, which he also does. Rodrigo is a very intelligent footballer and knows when to hold with, even though that's not what he's the best at. He knows when to run behind, even though that's not what he's the best at. Florian Wirtz, super intelligent. McAllister, intelligent. Ekitike, we know that he's intelligent. We just know that there are other problems with him. Not a great finisher, maybe not physical enough, but he's also an intelligent footballer. Signing footballers like that makes sense for the system because these are very flexible, intelligent footballers. Now, I could talk about Gakpo instead of Rodrigo. Is he intelligent? Yeah. But can Gakpo do a whole lot? No. Gakpo isn't going to be the guy who's going to fluidly rotate around. Gakpo just likes to go to the byline and cross, or go here and cross, or go here and shoot, right? Gakpo is not really suited to this system at all. You could talk about Lucho. Lucho, he loves to run around. We saw it at Porto and we saw it earlier on in Liverpool. He can go around. But Lucho's not a very intelligent footballer. Lucho doesn't make incredible decisions. We don't really see that often, right? You don't see Lucho playing smart passes or knowing when to just cut the ball back. He's either too cautious or too risk-taking. Doesn't really read the game well enough. And I don't really even need to talk about Nunes in a system like this. Could he go everywhere? Yeah. Is he intelligent enough to do these types of combinations? Probably not. So it makes sense with the signings that we're making for us to play like PSG. It gives you the opportunity to even drop someone like Ekitike and then maybe bring Szoboszlai back to play on the wing. Completely possible. So I want to close this out by talking about some of the other players who would fit this play style, who are gettable. One I would immediately talk about is Kenan Yildiz and also Morgan Rogers. Now, both of these guys play similar roles. They're robust ball carriers. They can play left wing, right wing, as a 10 or as a striker. They're comfortable everywhere. Yildiz can dribble on the right, the left. Rogers can dribble on the right, the left. Rogers can play as a target man. He can play as a 10, which he did at Middlesbrough. Yildiz can play as a 10 or as a striker. Less of a target man, but more of like a threat in behind sort of player. These two would fit the bill perfectly. Another one who would fit well is someone who's at PSG, Barcola, because he can play as a left winger, a striker, or a right winger. Of course, he's not gettable, but he'd be a better fit than Rodrigo, mainly because of the sort of strength that Barcola has. He's much more of a robust footballer, much more physical. He would fit the team more. Mikitadze would fit well in the striker position because he likes to drift around and he likes to link up play. Chiesa fits this system really well. Chiesa would be great in the Dembele role as the striker. Don't get me wrong, Ekitike would be great in that role. Alexander Isak would be great in that role. They would just be more so out and out strikers / channel runners who make space for other people versus people who drop in. Now, you could actually develop Ekitike into somebody who drops in, but is that the best use of him? I'm not sure. If his finishing doesn't develop, I guess it's the only use of him. And that wouldn't be bad. He would be like a Benzema type, striker, and that's fine. But it's clear, though, from what we've seen, that Slot is at least trying to emulate a lot of the principles of PSG. And he might not be trying to play exactly like them, but I mean, we never really thought he was directly copying them. When we say Slot wants to play like PSG, that doesn't mean he's trying to copy them. But yeah, this is effectively how I think we're going to play next season, and this is what I think Slot's vision for the team is. That's it for this video. If you liked the video, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and go ahead and follow me on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching.